Good evening and shalom aleichem, everybody. Freilich and Chanukah, and thank you so much for joining me for the third shiur in our series. I once again want to begin tonight by thanking Fran Mermelstein, who has generously sponsored our entire series in memory of her late husband, Shelley Mermelstein, Yosef Shmuel Shmelka ben Yitzchak. Tonight's shiur is generously sponsored by Micha Kaufman in honor of the marking of his first year of recovery, and in gratitude to Hashem as well as to the many other people who have assisted him along the way. And finally, tonight's shiur is sponsored by Pearl and Moshe Markovitz, commemorating the yahrzeits of Ruchama bas Moshe V'bracha and Tzvia bas Eliezer and Batsheva, as well as the yahrzeits of, where is it? Here it is. The yahrzeits of Yitzchak Dov ben Yosef Aaron and Chaya and Rav Chaim Yeshua ben Rav Yaakov HaKohen and Rivka. We thank them again for their generous sponsorships, and anybody else who is interested in sponsoring any one of the remaining shiurim in this series, please contact the office at bethaaron.org. Thank you again for joining me. Now for the third in our series. Tonight's topic is what the Siddur can teach us about the history, faith, and spirit of the Jewish people. Now, given the fact that this is our third week talking about prayer, I think I am fairly comfortable saying that each and every one of us, at this point in our conversation, would agree on a certain basic set of definitions for prayer. And while tefillah in general is too broad of a topic and a concept to capture in several words, I think that if we could say that, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so the pictures that I've selected over here, I think you would agree, sort of capture, in a certain sense, what it means for a person to be engrossed in prayer. Prayer, which is a deep connection between an individual and God. Prayer, which is a conversation. Prayer, which is an attempt for an individual to beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to speak, to ask, to request for divine mercy. These are all experiences which we naturally associate with the concept of prayer. Actually, the Medrash in Devarim Rabbah tells us in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that there are 10 different expressions that we find in Tanakh which describe prayer. And here they are listed: Shava, Tzaka, Na'aka, Rina, Pegia, Bitzur, Kriya, Nipul, Pilul, and Tachnunim. Translated perhaps loosely as cry, lament, groan, song, encounter, trouble, call, fall, beseechment, and supplication. For those who have had the opportunity to study the book by Rav Shimshon Pincus called Sha'arim B'Tefillah, which has been translated into English, Gates of Prayer, so actually that book is devoted to analyzing these 10 different descriptions. About 5 years ago or so, in the Tefillah shiur that we have in our shul, which has since become a Tanakh shiur, before Shabbos morning, before davening on Shabbos morning. So we actually studied this sefer. We were able to finish it after about a year and a half or so, in which we analyzed these 10 expressions. But I think it's fair to say that they, although they're different, they capture the same basic concept, and that is prayer is a point of connection between us and God, in which we are communicating with, speaking to, hearing from, calling to God. I think we would similarly agree that when we speak about Jewish history as a subject, as something that we would study either out of curiosity or because it enhances our ability to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that's a completely different topic and area of study. We would not turn to a siddur and look for insights into Jewish history. Similarly, if a person wanted to explore concepts of faith and Jewish philosophy, what it means to believe as a Jew, what does it mean to think as a Jew? What does the Torah require us in terms of what we call the chovos halavavos, the obligations of our hearts, rather than merely the chovos eivarim, the obligations of our limbs, that which we do? So I think here again we would agree that this is a very important question, something that we really need to explore and we would need to study. But you need to know where to look, whether it's in the Moreh Nevuchim, the writings of the Ramchal, or more contemporary philosophers, great thinkers such as Soloveitchik, Suchon Levracha, Rabbi Sachs. So these are places where we can go to explore and to try to understand what does it mean to be, to feel, to think as a Jew. But again, we wouldn't look towards the Siddur for this type of inspiration, for this type of information. A Siddur, once again, is a place where we go to talk to God, to pray to God, to be mispalel. Now, several weeks ago, I presented to you the concept that there are many different layers to the Siddur. And to the extent that we want to really, really become more informed and understanding and closer with the words of the davening as they appear in the Siddur, we should appreciate that we are looking at a very, very multi-layered text. And there are, in fact, many, many different ways of analyzing the text. For the purpose of tonight's presentation, in which I hope to just sort of give a sampling of where we can find and where we could learn a lot about the history and the faith of Jewish people in the Siddur, I'm going to focus on 3 layers, if you will. And this is just, these are random descriptions, which I'm using. You're welcome to use different descriptions. The first one, naturally, I'm going to call the surface. The surface means without much digging, without having to scratch the surface, there are certain things that appear right on the surface, which reveal some very, very important aspects of Jewish history and Jewish faith. We're also going to take a little bit of a look beneath the surface, which means it doesn't require much exploration. You don't necessarily have to study in any great depth. But if you look a little bit beneath the surface, you will discover some very, very interesting and perhaps not as obvious reflections of Jewish history and Jewish faith. And finally, we're going to go a little bit below the surface. Now, I said beforehand, there are a multitude of layers. I don't know how many, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions. Remember that the Siddur is a composition of tefillos which were composed by individuals who were inspired by Ruach HaKodesh, including prophets who had literally nevuah prophecy. And so therefore, we should recognize and appreciate that there's only so much that we can expect to uncover, to disclose, to reveal, certainly in a short presentation like this. And so therefore, I'm not going to be too bold. I'm not going to try to peel apart 10, 15, 20, 50 layers. We're just going to go for the surface, beneath the surface, and a little below the surface. So let's start with history on the surface. Where do we find history, Jewish history on the surface in our Siddur? So I'm not sure that this is necessarily the first place to start, but going in order, if you will, within sequence of davening, towards the end of the Pesukei de Zimra, there's a paragraph which begins with the words Vayivarech David as Hashem le'enei kol hakol. Those are psukim that are found in Sefer Divrei Hayamim, and these are psukim these are words that were recited by David HaMelech when having assembled the necessary contributions for the Beis HaMikdash, which would ultimately be constructed by his son Shlomo HaMelech. As we know, David wanted so much to be able to construct the Beis HaMikdash, but he was told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he cannot do so. But yet he did have a very significant hand in the preparation, in the development of the building, not literally, but perhaps very, very importantly, the foundation of the Beis HaMikdash, which is why we say every day, Mizmoshir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid, that David HaMelech does have a very, very significant, real relationship with the Beis HaMikdash, even though he never lived to actually see it. When David facilitated and began the process and achieved the assembling and the collection of many contributions which were needed to build the Beis HaMikdash, so he composed a song, words of Shevach V'Otato HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which we recite each and every morning. Now, I'm not suggesting that when we daven in the morning, we should use this as an opportunity to reflect upon this as a history lesson. And I'm not going to repeat this point again and again tonight, but I am going to say it now. And that is that at certain points throughout the week, throughout our life, when we are saying these words again and again and again, we should stop and just reflect upon those words. Vayivarech David es enei Hashem le'enei kol hakol. These words were recited by David HaMelech at a particular moment in time. There was an event. There was literally an assembly of people which prompted these words. And to, number one, just to understand that, to be sort of an informed davener, but beyond that, to sort of be inspired by that thought and to connect with this moment in Jewish history. We go on to say in the continuation of that paragraph, and we reference significant moments in our history, not necessarily in chronological order, including the bris bein habesarim with Avram Avinu, the changing of Avram's name from Avram to Avraham. These, in the context of these tefillos, we can't say that these are mere supplications. We are not asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to change our name, but we are referencing these moments in history because they are significant, not just in their own right, but they enhance the experience of our davening at this very moment. Perhaps an obvious one, again, on the surface. You didn't really have to come tonight for me to tell you that each and every day we relive Kriyas Yamsuf. First of all, by singing, if you will, Az Yashir the Shiras Hayam, and also in the davening, particularly in the Birchas HaGeula, the third of the Birchas Kriyas Shema, that we recite both in the morning and at night at Mariv, with very elaborate descriptions of Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kriyas Yamsuf. And I say elaborate because there is a lot of detail there. There's a lot of detail, actually, a lot more of Kriyas Yamsuf than of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is an interesting topic to explore. But it's even worthwhile to compare the two because the brachos are very different, and you may find several significant differences, which really, really require some great thought to understand it, to reconcile what appear to be some very, very subtle but very significant contradictions between the text that we say in the morning and the afternoon, or in the evening rather. But what's important is to recognize that each and every day we are reliving this aspect of our history. Whenever we take out the Torah, we say the words Vayhi ben Soa ha'aron. When we put the Torah back, we say Uvnucho Yomar. These are obviously the beginning of passages. I'm only citing the first few words. And at these moments, what do? We relive these moments, which are described by the Torah, awesome moments, when we would actually go ahead and travel in the Midbar, when the entire Jewish people would move, millions of people would move in unison with the Aron, with the Mishkan, with being led by the Amud, Ha'anan, by the Eish at night. These images of Jewish history should be seared into our minds, should be part of our conscious thinking when we are saying these words. We are not praying at these moments that this is something that should happen now. We just have to think about what it is that we are saying, and of course, why it is that we say it right now. Perhaps I would say an obvious example, at the end of davening, when we recite each and every day a different Mizmor of Tehillim of Shir Shel Yom, what do we say? Hayom Yom, Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, etc. Shabo, Hoyu Halavim Omrim Beveis Hamikdash. On this day, these are the exact words that the Leviim would recite, that they would sing in the Beis Hamikdash. So just think about it. We are at this moment recounting an important part of our history, and how important it is when we say these words to understand and to appreciate that we are trying to enhance our davening by connecting with this part of our history. Rabbi Sachs, in his introduction to the Siddur, the RCA Koren Siddur, writes, "We are a people defined by history. We carry our past with us. We relive it in ritual and prayer. We are not lonely individuals disconnected with past and present. We are characters in the world's oldest continuous story, charged with writing its next chapter and handing it on to those who come after us. The Siddur is, among other things, a book of Jewish memory." Rabbi Sachs Zechron Levracha reminds us that the Siddur is, in addition to being a handbook, if you will, a prayer book through which we daven to Hashem, we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to fulfill all of the things that we need and we want. It is, among other things, a book of Jewish memory, of Jewish history. Now that's history on the surface. What about faith on the surface? Where do we find ideas, values, principles, foundations, fundamentals of Jewish faith on the surface in the Siddur? So perhaps an easy example, starting all the way at the beginning, Adon Olam, that beautiful song that we sometimes sing, sometimes we say Adon Olam, in which we identify as, among other things, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Borei Olam, the creator of the world, that God transcends time and place. B'terem kol yitzir nivra, v'acharei chen kechlos hakol levado yimloch nora, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, always was, and always will be. We refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as our Redeemer, and not only the Redeemer of the Jewish people, taking us out of Mitzrayim, but the one who redeems each and every one of us when we find ourselves in times of difficulty and suffering. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the protector of the Jewish people. the concept of the eternity of the soul. So here you have an Adon Olam, which on a certain level is a prayer. We do incorporate it in a davening as a way of connecting to the Rabbanu Shalom. We are also articulating, delineating different aspects of our faith. Now, each and every one of these points, obviously, can be and should be explored in much greater depth. But to say that the Siddur is merely a book that we open in which we talk to God, it's also a book in which we talk about God. Right after Adon Olam appears in the Siddur, Yigdal, which is based on the Ikari Amunah and the 13 principles of faith, if you will, which the Rambam outlined, include, this is not all of them, God transcending time and space, the concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no body, incorporeality of God, the Torah is divine, that Torah came in Hashemayim, existence of prophecy, the difference between all the prophets and Moshe Rabbeinu, Schar va'onesh, reward and punishment, the fact that we are accountable for our actions in this world, belief in the ultimate coming of Mashiach, resurrection of the dead. Now, these, again, are very, very important aspects, foundations of our faith. And where do we find them? Among other places, you find them in the Siddur. They are part of the liturgy. They are part of our davening. This is what we come back to each and every day as we check in, not only to speak to God, but to speak to ourselves about God. Now, Kriya Shema. Now, you think about Kriya Shema as being a prayer. It's a tefillah. Well, that's true on a certain level, but it's not, when you think about it, it's not a prayer like Shemona Esrei. The Amidah is a prayer. Kriya Shema is a declaration. It's a declaration of faith in which we engage in what Chazal called Kabbalas or Malchus Shemayim, accepting upon ourselves the yoke of heaven. We remind ourselves the importance of loving Hashem and fearing God, the oneness, the unity of God. Kabbalas on mitzvos in the second paragraph of Kriya Shema, V'hoyem Shema Tishmua Mitzvosai, to what? To accept upon ourselves the mitzvahs of the Torah, once again, reward and punishment, God is Redeemer, etc. Aleinu, which it comes at the end of every davening. What do we speak about in Aleinu? Well, we speak about the unique status of the Jewish people. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol. Shelo samcha kenu kichol hamonam. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu separated us and gave us a very unique mission in this world. And we speak in Aleinu about our vision for the world. L'sakein olam b'malchus shakai. That we have a very, very important vision for the world. Aleinu in that respect is not a tefillah, it's not a prayer. We're not asking, well, perhaps at certain points we are, but in that point we're not asking as much as we are reminding ourselves our mission in this world, our assertion of our belief in the ultimate universal acceptance of God as King of the world. That is the direction in the world in which the world will ultimately head. So faith, this is all on the surface. This is not with me going ahead and saying, oh, look beneath the surface. This is all right there. You can't miss it. Unless, of course, we are so distracted. We are davening so, God forbid, so thoughtlessly, so mindlessly, that we are failing to recognize these revelations of our faith right on the surface. Rabbi Sachs writes, this is a powerful quote, the Siddur is also a book of Jewish faith. Scholars of Judaism, noting that it contains the systematic theology, have sometimes concluded that it is a religion of deeds, not creeds, acts, not beliefs. They were wrong because they were searching in the wrong place. They were looking for a library of works, like Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. They should have looked instead at the prayer book. The home of Jewish belief is the Siddur. Rabbi Sachs reminds us that great philosophers who had characterized Judaism a certain way because they had assumed that perhaps like other religions, other systems of faith, there would be libraries of books that would talk about what it means to think, to feel, to be as a Jew. And he said they should have looked at a Siddur. The home of Jewish belief, of Jewish faith, is the Siddur. Now what we're going to do is go a little bit beneath the surface, right? Remember I told you we're going to look at the surface, beneath the surface, and below the surface. So now let's take a little bit beneath the surface. In the beginning of davening, when we're still in the pre-Psuke de Zimmer section, we say Ashreinu, how fortunate we are, Shanachnu mashkimim u'marivim, that we get up early in the morning and we return to daven in the evening, Erev avoker, V'omrim, and what do we say? Pamayim b'chol yom, twice a day we say Shema Yisrael. And we say at the very least the first pasuk. Some have the tradition of reciting the first parsha of Shema. Why are we saying Shema at that particular point in davening? Don't we say Shema later? And actually, I don't want to have a discussion right now, but it's an interesting halachic discussion, whether or not you even should say Shema outside of the context of Birchos Kriya Shema. Why would I waste, so to speak, a golden opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah in the most proper way, b'shleimusa, within the context of Birchos Kriya Shema? Why would I say it early? So very, very interesting. During the 5th century, the Jews in the Persian Empire were forbidden from reciting the Shema. There were actually guards that were stationed at every synagogue to enforce this law and to make sure that the Jews would not say Shema. So what did the Jews do? So they said Shema at home. But even after this ban was lifted, the first pasuk of Shema was made part of the introductory prayer of Shacharis. Now, you can ask why? That's a good question. You have to come back another time to hear that answer. But I'm not interested in the why right now. It's the what. When we say every day Shema at this point in davening, this is a vestige. This is a remnant of a very, very painful part of our history. The Jews were not permitted to say Shema in shul. And so therefore they said it at home. And the way we recall this, we preserve this very painful but very important aspect of our history is by incorporating it into the Siddur. In the beginning, towards the beginning of Pesukei Zimra, at least according to Nusach Ashkenaz, those who have daven different nuschos, they sometimes say it before the beginning of Pesukei Zimra, before Baruch Shamar, say Hodu. Just like beforehand, Vayivarach David comes from Divrei Yamim, so does at least the first section of Hodu. This is from the song that David HaMelech sang when the Aron was brought to Yerushalayim. Beautiful psukim in Sefer Shmuel Beis, which describe the bringing of the Aron to Yerushalayim, how David HaMelech danced with such excitement and such fervor in front of all the people. These words were recited at that time. Now, I say it's beneath the surface because unlike, Kriyas Yamsuf, and unlike some of the other things that we mentioned beforehand, Vayivarech David as Ine Hashem le'ine kol hakol. So over here, you have to actually know something. You have to do a little digging. You have to look a little bit into the history of these words to know exactly where they come from. But there's nothing so deep here. There's nothing so profound. We are reiterating songs that were expressed at very, very significant moments in our history. Now, here's a fascinating one in the Bracha of Ava Rabbah that we say before Kriya Shema, the second of the Berachos Kriya Shema. So the Magen Avram writes that we have a tradition from Chaim Vital that there are, we know, the Zechiros. There are 6 Zechiros, things that a Jew has to remember. It's a question whether you have to remember them every day, some of them every day, some not every day. But he says that we find references to the Zechiros in these words. What do we say? We say Uvanu v'charta. And he says that when a person says the words Uvanu v'charta mikol am v'lashon, that you selected us, he should remember at that moment Matan Torah. How did God select us? By giving us the Torah. V'keiravtanu, that you brought us close to you. Where? He says at Maimon Har Sinai, which of course is another one of the Zechiros. L'shimcha hagadol, when we say your great name, this is a reference to the war with Amalek. Because as long as Amalek attacks the Jew in the world, Ein Hashem Shalem, there is something incomplete about the Shem Hashem. Lahodos lecha, expressing our thanksgiving to you. Hapelo nivra rak lahodos. We were given a mouth to express our thanks to Hashem. V'lo ledaber lashon hara. V'zeu zechiras ma'aseh Miriam. This is a way in which we remember the ma'aseh Miriam. U'zachartem es kol mitzvos Hashem. This is Shabbos sheshkula keneged kol mitzvos. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4 Shabbos technically, although maybe even Shabbos also we can call an event in history, the creation of the world. So here you have in these words Uvanu v'charta, v'keirav tanu, l'shimcha gadol, l'hodos l'choz, l'chartam is komitz v'sashem and Kriya Shema. These are all references to events in history. Now this is definitely beneath the surface. I don't know how many people on their own would say, oh yeah, Uvanu v'charta, of course, that's Matan Torah, v'keirav tanu, that's Maimon Har Sinai, l'shimcha gadol, that's Mechemes Amalek. I don't think most people think in those terms. But once you hear that idea, and of course you can remember it and incorporate it into the davening, so now history, Jewish history, is coming alive each and every morning when we daven. Daf Torah, which we obviously don't say each and every morning, we say on Shabbos and Yom Tif, What's the history of the Haftarah? Why are we reciting after Kriyas HaTorah psukim from the Navi? So in 168 BCE, now, of course, it's Hanukkah now. You know this name. Antiochus forbade the reading of the Torah. The reading of the Navi then became introduced as a substitute. Most are familiar with this idea. But how many people stop and remind themselves each and every week that we are reading the Haftarah right now, again, just like we saw earlier, by reciting the first pasuk of Shema earlier in the davening, we are preserving a tradition which was instituted at a time of persecution. The Haftarah is, at least according to this explanation, this interpretation as to what the origin of the Haftarah is, it is a way of preserving a very, very painful moment in our history. There is another tradition as we have as why we read the Haftarah, but it's also a part of our history. This was instituted according to this approach as a response to sects of Jews that did not accept the books of the Nevi'im. We've heard about Jews that only accept the Torah Sheb'chsav, not Torah Sheb'al-Peh. Here you have Jews that only accept the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, not the Nevi'im. So what's our message to them? We read each and every Shabbos and Yom Tov, we read from the Navi to remind each and every one of us and everybody who's listening and people who aren't listening that the words of the prophets are true. And so therefore, there are aspects of our history that are revealed, again, slightly beneath the surface if we just remind ourselves, why are we reading the Haftarah each and every week? Avarachamim, which is traditionally recited on Moshe Abbasos throughout the year, and of course Yizkar, which is a very meaningful prayer that is recited by people. It was originally said only on Yom Kippur. Now it's traditional today other times throughout the year as well, including the Shalosh Regalim. The Yizkar and Avarachamim were written at some point in the late 11th century after the destruction of Jewish communities by the Christian Crusaders. Now, Yizkar, of course, has become a very personalized prayer because when people recite Yizkar, they do so as a way of connecting with, reminding themselves of, and trying literally to connect with the souls of departed relatives. And in that regard, it is a very, very personal prayer. I'm not suggesting that a person has to forget that entirely, but it is important for us as a community to remind ourselves that Yizkar originally was instituted as a way of remembering communities, individuals that were decimated by the Christian Crusaders. Av Harachamim, which we say each and every Shabbos, which we know that we omit on certain celebratory Shabbosos, also written at this time. And so therefore, it is important for us from time to time to remind ourselves, where did these tefillos come from? What is the origin of this prayer? And to remind ourselves that we have a very rich, a very long, and in some respects, a very bitter history. Now that's history beneath the surface. What about faith beneath the surface? Where do we find ideas, values of Jewish faith beneath the surface on the Siddur? So every morning we recite the bracha of Elokai Neshama Shenasatabi Tohorahi. This bracha highlights our belief that man is created in a state of purity. And this is against the Pauline doctrine of original sin. We know that some believed, we don't believe this, but some believe that what? That ever since the sin of Adam Arishon, so we are all created, so tainted, without that innocence, without that purity. We are born with original sin. And we don't believe that. We declare each and every morning, Elokai, Neshama Shenasata Bi Tahora, and not only Tahora Hayasa, Tahora He, which I think reveals another very, very important aspect of Jewish faith. And that is the power of prayer, of tshuva, of repentance, how it can be so cleansing for the soul. And so therefore, by saying those few words, we are revealing a very, very important doctrine of our faith, one which really is a statement against a very, very opposing view, which is different than our religion. The brach of Yotze Or, we spoke about this last week, the first of the three Bechos Kriya Shema, Yotze Or Uvorei Choshech, that God created light and darkness. Oseh Shalom Uvoreyas Hakol, the real pasuk, Oseh Shalom Uvoreyas Hara, that God made everything, light, darkness, good, evil. This is a protest against dualism, which had a considerable following in the first 4 centuries. The bracha emphasizes the Jewish insistence that all reality derives from a single source. When we recite the bracha of Yotze Or, we are reminding ourselves that everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Oseh Chadashos, Borei Refuos, Nora Sihilos, everything in the world, everything that happens is all coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whether it is Or Choshech, whether it is Tov or it is seemingly Ra. It all comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, at the end of the Kriya Shema, we say a tefillah that is really, it begins with the word emes. We sometimes call it v'yatziv, because we know that we don't separate between Shema and the tefillah that follows. So we conclude the words with Shema with the words Ani Hashem Elokeichem emes. But really, the pasuk concludes Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and then the tefillah is emes v'yatziv v'nachum v'kayam. Now, what's going on in the emes v'yatziv v'nachum v'kayam? So what you have over there, you could take out a siddur now or later and count it. You have 8 pairs of words, which convey an affirmation of the previously mentioned truth. When we say hadavar hazeh, that expression is used 2 or 3 times. Hadavar hazeh, this thing, this matter, this truth. What truth? The truth of Ani Hashem Elokeichem, that Hashem's presence in the world is constant and in all circumstances, whether during a time of Gilui Shechina or Hester Panim. I don't have the time right now to really explain and to elaborate. Rabbi Schwab in his Sefer on Tefillah does so at great length, and he does so, I don't remember where, but in his Sefer on Chumash as well, explaining each and every one of those 8 phrases, those pairs, to explain exactly what is going on over there. But beneath the surface, slightly beneath the surface, there are some very, very, very important fundamentals of faith to remind ourselves that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us at all times, not only at times of Gilui Shechina, like at the moments of Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kriyas Yamsuf, but even in times of Hester Panim, even in times when God's presence in the world is not as obvious, it's not as visible. Even then, we say emes v'yatziv v'nachum v'kayam, etc. Bama and Likin. Many shuls have a custom of reciting the Mishnayos from the second parak of Masechah Shabbos on Friday night. Why do we recite it Friday night? Which should be obvious. We recite Bama and Likin Friday night because it's a review, it's a summary of the laws of Adlakas Ner Shabbos, which of course is a mitzvah that we do on Friday night. And so therefore it is a most fitting way to perhaps learn a little bit, to stall a little bit, fine. But it has been suggested that this may also be a response to the Tzedukim, who said that there is no fire, there's no light on Shabbos. The pasuk says in Parshas Vayakel, "Usavaro eish b'chol moshavosechem b'yom Shabbos." You should not light a fire. And the Tzedukim, who rejected Torah Shabbat Peh, they understood it literally. You cannot have a fire burning even from before Shabbos. So what's our response to them? Well, first and foremost, our response is we dafka light candles. We dafka sit in light on Shabbos. You're not supposed to sit in the dark on Shabbos. And perhaps the custom to have hot food, shalent, is also because we want to emphasize that you may have a fire on Shabbos. You can't light a fire on Shabbos. You can't kindle, you can't start a fire on Shabbos. But of course, we can benefit from a light, from a fire that was lit beforehand. And one of the ways in the Siddur that we declare this rejection of the Tzedukim is by reciting each and every Friday night, Bama Medlikin. Now, we're going to go a little bit below the surface now. As we near the end of our presentation, we took a look at of history and faith on the surface, history and faith beneath the surface, and now we're going to take a look at history and faith below the surface. Now we know that before we begin Shmon Esrei, it is customary to take 3 steps forward. Actually, it's very interesting. And when we finish the davening, we take 3 steps back. The concept of taking 3 steps back after davening, that actually is found in the Gemara. However, taking 3 steps forward, that's not found in the Gemara. The Gemara that's not found in Chazal. So where do we find this? So the Ramah in Orach Chaim Siman Tzadi Hey records this custom from the Rokeach. He says, Yeshomrim kisha'omin l'spala yelech lefanav shlosha pesios. 3 steps. Derech karo v'hagasha l'davar shetzarech lasos. This is a way of bringing ourselves close, drawing ourselves close to something very important that we are about to do. So here we are about to daven Shmon Esrei. And of course, in preparation, we bring ourselves closer. 1, 2, 3. However, the key word over here is hagasha, bringing ourselves close. And the Rokeach actually explains that the idea of 3 steps is based on the 3 times that we find in Tanakh at a very, very pivotal moment, at a very, very crucial moment. The pasuk says Vayigash. When Avram was praying on behalf of Sodom, it says Vayigash Avram, that Avram drew close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Over there, he was about to embark on a very, very challenging endeavor. He was appealing to the Ribono Shel Olam to reverse his decision. He was, as we remember, negotiating with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a way that seemed on the surface almost to be disrespectful. And he doesn't just barge in and bang his fists on the table and he says, "How dare you?" Even though he goes on to talk in in pretty similar terms, but it's Vayigash Avram. We're going to read next week. This week's Parsha is Miketz. Next week is Vayigash. Vayigash Elav Yehuda. Now this one is a little different, and actually I'm happy to talk about this another time. There's what to discuss over here. This is not an instance where a person is approaching God. In this case, Yehuda is approaching the king of Egypt, Yosef. He doesn't know that he's his brother. He discovers after this encounter. Vayigash Elav Yehuda. Yehuda, of course, stepping closer to Yosef, appealing for mercy, for compassion, appealing to take him instead of Binyamin. Vayigash Elav Yehuda. And of course, the famous story that is recorded in Sefer Melachim Aleph, Perek Yudches, Vayigash Eliyahu Hanavi, who when the confrontation with the Nevi'ei Baal draws close at that moment in prayer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Rokeach says Vayigash 3 times, so we take 3 steps forward before we approach the Ribbono Shel Olam. Now this, I would say, is not just beneath the surface. This is way below the surface. This is not necessarily the lowest you can go, certainly not. But there are some very, very profound ideas. These are 3 moments in history, 3 moments in Jewish history. Avram, Yehud and Yosef, and Eliyahu Hanavi. They're crucial moments of Vayigash, inspire each and every time we take 3 steps forward when we daven Shemona Esrei. Now there is a prayer that we all know, we recite on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's called Nishmas. It's also recited in the Leila Seder as part of the Haggadah. A beautiful prayer. I think most of us, I hope, would agree that Nishmas is a very, very beautiful prayer. I think within the last few weeks, I've seen that Art School has published a new commentary, entire Sefer, looks like devoted to the topic of Nishmas. I haven't seen the Sefer, but I've seen it advertised. Now, what I'm about to share with you, if you've never heard this before, it may surprise you. Actually, if you never heard it before, it will surprise you. It will probably shock you. I'm happy to discuss it more. I've actually given shiurim on this topic in the past, and there's some fascinating articles that are available in different Sfarim. Dr. Shneur Lyman has an article about this topic. So forgive me for doing, not real justice to this right now, because I'm about to say something which is pretty wild. But who composed the Tefillah of Nishmas? So there's a long story behind this. I mean, the simple answer is we don't know. We don't know for sure who composed this tefillah, but there is a tradition which has its sources actually in Rashi, maybe not the earliest sources, but of course a very, very important authoritative source. Rashi, in an uncensored version of his commentary on Maseches Avodah Zarah, talks about the fact that some of the close disciples of Jesus were actually, well, all of them were Jews. That we know. Early Christians were Jews. But some of them were actually not really believing Christians. They were actually believing Jews. And some of them, one in particular, perhaps went undercover. And they did so. What does it mean went undercover? There was, in the days of early Christianity, there were many, what we would call today, I mean, this is not the term we would use then, but we would call it like many from Orthodox Jews who were getting caught up because the early Christianity didn't necessarily look all that different than what it meant to be, a nice from Orthodox Jew. At a certain point, the differences became quite stark and quite significant and many, and so you couldn't really even compare them anymore. Why did that happen? It happened because the early Christians reformed things in such a substantial way. Now, this tradition suggests that some of that, or to a certain extent, a lot of that, was actually propelled and pushed forward by Jews who were acting l'shem shamayim, who wanted to make sure that the differences between these two faiths would be so clear and so obvious that a Jew could not possibly mistake the two. In a situation where you are assimilating, but you don't realize that you are assimilating, so then it's in some ways it's a lot more dangerous than when you realize that there's a great divide, there's a great gap between where I am right now and where these people are inviting me to go. And so therefore Rashi suggests over here that they didn't actually believe the things that they were saying, but they joined that camp in an effort to what? To move that early Christian agenda forward because they couldn't stop it. And by doing so, would hopefully protect the many Jews who would otherwise essentially convert. They would leave the faith without realizing. Now, over here, it's recorded in Machzavitri from Rashi, that Nishmas, which we call Bechus Hashir, was written by, he describes over here, there's a whole story behind this. I can't really go into it right now. Shimon Petach Hamor, which is Shimon or Simon Peter, Saint Peter, which is just a wild idea because Saint Peter, according to this tradition, which is not all recorded here, but it's recorded in other places, when he was living as he did his last days in his life in what we call today Saint Peter's Basilica, so he actually composed Nishmas and sent it to his brothers to recite. Now, what's really interesting about this is that there are numerous references in Nishmas to the fact that we serve God and God only. There is no one else who can redeem us and save us other than God. In lanu melech ala ata. Hashem lo yanum lo yishan l'chol levadcha anachnu modim. V'al Hashem elokeinu lenetzach, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will never abandon us, the Jewish people. And so therefore, embedded within Nishmas, and there are many, many more references. I'm just not doing the surface. I'm not doing this any justice right now. There are many, many messages over here which were intended to inspire and to convey people that were suffering and that were confused. And actually, we know that we're about to begin the month of Teves. We know that, of course, the 10th of Teves is a fast day. There's a tradition. Most people don't fast on the 9th of Teves, but there is a tradition that the 9th and even the 8th of Teves were originally fast days. It's found in Shulchan Aruch, based on this tradition, that there are those who fast on the 9th of Teves. Although it's very strange. It says there, we don't know why. We don't know the reason. Why would you fast and you don't know the reason? Doesn't that sort of undermine the entire purpose of fast? Well, maybe not. But it's a very strange. So, again, this will be my last point on this topic, and that is that it is brought down that some suggest that that's actually the day of the death, the yard site of Peter, of St. Peter, who really was a tzaddik, but people didn't know. And so therefore they had to sort of keep it a secret. They had to keep it a secret from the Jews. They had to keep it a secret from the Christians. And there is, again, this tradition. So I'm not saying, once again, that this is something that should inspire us consciously every time we say Nishmas, but you talk about history below the surface. Wow, that the Tefillah of Nishmas, that beautiful prayer, may have been composed, according to Rashi, this tradition over here, by the last person on earth that you would ever expect. Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar is, of course, the beginning of Psukkah de Zimra. It's the opening bracha, which really has two sections. And I'm going to focus very briefly on the first section tonight. The first section consists of 10 different aspects of the definition of the Shem HaMufurash, the Shem Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei. And each of these is preceded by Baruch. And so therefore, if you open the Baruch She'amar, you'll see that the word Baruch appears 10 times, each one preceding a specific definition of the Shem Hashem. Now, what's significant is that each and every one of these definitions is based on a separate pasuk. Here again, you'll have to take a look at Rav Schwab on Prayer Inside for more detail, because I'm not really going through the detail. I'm just going to whet your appetite right now. But I hope that when you say Baruch She'amar tomorrow morning, you'll say it a little differently. First of all, you'll notice how many Baruchs over there. There are 10. And each Baruch is preceding a different way of defining the name Hashem, each and every one of them based on different psukim. It's absolutely fascinating. Take a look inside. Baruch She'amar v'haya olam is defining God as the creator, the one who created the world, Yesh Mayayin. Baruch Oseh Bereshis, that he constantly creates and recreates. Baruch Omer V'Oseh, that he makes his word into reality. He makes his word come true. Baruch Ozer Mekayim, that Hashem meets out punishment to the Rishayim. Baruch Merachem El Haaretz, that God has mercy on the earth. Baruch Merachem El Abrios, that he bestows his mercy and compassion upon all living creatures. Baruch Mishalem Sachatov L'Reyav, that he created Olam Haba as a place of reward for tzaddikim. Baruch Chai V'Kayom L'Netzach, that God is eternal. Baruch Podeo Matzil, that he redeems and saves us from suffering. Baruch Shemo, God's name in and of itself is beyond comprehension. Now, I just went through this very quickly, but what I just did is I gave you a list of 10 Baruchs, each of them followed by a very unique and separate and distinct description of the Shem Hashem. Each and every one of these, once again, based independently on a pasuk. And so therefore, take a look at Rav Schwab inside. It is mind-blowing. And I can assure you that if you spend a little time with that piece, you will never say Baruch She'amar the same way again. This is certainly faith below the surface. Some very, very important principles of Jewish faith, not on the surface, not even beneath the surface, but way below the surface. Now, at the end of Pesukei de Zimra, we recite the bracha known as Yishtabach, which is sort of like the bookend. It's the other end of Baruch Shamar. Like here, you don't have the entire bracha of Yishtabach, but certain key phrases. The bracha begins with the words Yishtabach Shem Chalad Malkeinu, that Hashem, your name is Yishtabach, it is blessed. Ki lechon Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei v'Seinu, that Hashem, these praises are fitting for you. Kel melech gadol b'tishbachos, kel odos adon and iflos, habochei b'shirei zimra melech ker chayolamim. Rav Soloveitchik, in one of his yard-side drushes that he gave, which is printed in Shiurim Zecher Avimori, the second volume, there's a piece on Pesukei de Zimra where the Rav talks about various aspects of Pesukei de Zimra and Hallel, and the Rav there explained that the bracha of Yishtabach is essentially, I'm going to summarize it and then we'll take a look at his beautiful words inside, how Yishtabach is essentially a submission, excuse me, it's a surrender at the end of Pesukei de Zimra, which was our attempt to praise Hashem, to basically say that we can't praise you. That you, Hashem, you defy praise. There is nothing that we can say which adequately serves as a proper and fitting praise for you. And so therefore, every day we go through the same sort of routine, if you will. We start off by saying, Baruch She'amar v'hoy olam, and then we say, what? We are going to praise you and bless you and exalt you. And then we try to do so. We go through many, many psukim from the Tehillim and Ashri and the Lukas, and then we come at the end and we say Yishtabach. What do those words mean? Yishtabach, says the Rav, Ein chazakok lidvarenu uletihi laseinu. You don't need our words and our praise. You, God, you are hidden from all. You transcend all. Everything is yours. We can't really adequately express any praise for you. Rather, what is it? You are fitting of these words, but not because we are saying them. The praises stem, they emanate from your essence. And we conclude with your name, Melech Gadol Batishbachos, HaMelech Shehu L'Mala, the king which is exalted. Gadol means Ein Sof, without limit. Afilu B'Shashu Humal Batishbachos, Kelodos, Shaldos Ein Shalo. Our expressions of thanksgiving, they are what? They are sort of part of his definition. Nevertheless, we say in Yishtabach, you have selected these passages. You have told us that we should say them. However, ha'ikar melech kel chayolamim. Hanela ministam recall, you defy, you transcend, you are above and beyond all phrase. And with this, we'll conclude this little piece over here. The word Yishtabach, said the Rav, b'milachas, with one word, Yishtabach, b'psukei de Zimra, acharei shesidarnu shivchosav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After we have laid out the various praises of Hashem, v'asaknu b'ritzui dvarim, and we have tried to say pleasing words of praise before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we stand and we declare, Kikol amalenu l'shav, that all of our efforts were for naught. We didn't accomplish anything. That our attempts are beyond our reach. We can't do this. The entire attempt to do so, the goal is not something we can achieve. Ushmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishtabach v'yispa'ar mi'atzmenu. And so therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, Yishtabach, is praised by its own essence. Post-Chemana b'Yisod, we begin Pesukei de Zimra with the concept of Hallelu Avdei Hashem, that we as servants of Hashem will attempt to praise Him. However, U'Mesayimim Yisod l'chadu miyat tehila, that we're better off being silent. And this, again, is such an important principle of faith, which certainly is below the surface. It's deep. You have to compare the bracha of Baruch She'amar, the Nahalelchacha u'Neshabechacha u'Nefe'ercha, where we begin with this bold and exciting attempt at, oh, look what we're going to do. We're going to praise you. And then we throw up our hands in frustration. We say, Yishtabach, we can't. Each and every morning we go through this repetition of sorts, this pattern of trying, but then declaring, surrendering that we can't. How beautiful, how powerful that is. Rav Soloveitchik, Subhanahu Levracha, revealed to us something so powerful beneath the surface. And finally, we begin the Shemona Esrei with the pasuk. Hashem sefasai tiftachu fi agid tilasecha. This pasuk, the Gemara tells us, is actually part of tefillah. It's what's called tefillah arichta. So therefore, when you take the 3 steps forward, which you mentioned earlier, you should take them before you begin the words Hashem Sefasai Tiftach. They're part of the Shemona Esrei. What do the words mean? Hashem, my God, Sefasai Tiftach, literally open my lips. Ufi Yagid Ilasecha, my mouth should speak, should express your praise. Now, why do we say this pasuk in the beginning of the Amidah Shemona Esrei? So, well, it seemed to make perfect sense. After all, it's very difficult. It's impossible. Who am I to go ahead and speak to God? How dare I open my mouth and speak to God? Melech Machayim Lachem. So what do? Hashem Sefasai Tiftach Ufi Yagid Ilasecha. Hashem Hashem, what? You please help me, assist me in opening my mouth. I can't even open my mouth without you. However, there's something deeper. This pasuk comes from Tehillim Nun Aleph, Psalms chapter 51, in which David HaMelech is talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu after coming to the recognition, the realization that he had sinned, a very significant sin involving Bathsheba. We won't go into that entire incident right now. Rabbeinu Yonah points out that the very next pasuk, after Hashem Sefasai Tiftach V'Yagid Ilasecha, reads Ki lo sachpot zevach va'etena olo lo sirtzeh. David says, because I am afraid that I cannot bring a korban at this time. I can't bring an offering, a sacrifice. It will not be pleasing before you. Now, we don't say that in our davening, but says Rabbeinu Yonah, that is part of the story. That is part of why we are saying this in our davening. Who knew? I didn't know I had to take a look at the pasuk inside in order to know why I'm saying it. Well, that's why it's called below the surface. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, Omar also David Kushay Mispala Chet Bathsheba. David HaMelech said these words when he was davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu after sin with Bathsheba. Shechataba Memezid. David realized that his sin was one which was committed b'mezid, intentionally. This wasn't shogeg. Valamezid ein mavi'in korban she'ein korban bo'al ala shogeg. You can't bring a sacrifice. Vakeno yimispala lebore tasieni she'uchal chavein b'tfilasi. Daven to Hashem, please give me the ability to have proper kavana. And why? So at least my tefillah will be accepted before you, because you will not want my korban at this time. Says Rabbeinu Yonah v'achshav gamkein, now as well, when I am about to daven, ein lanu beis hamikdash, ve'en anachnu makrivim korbanos, an onrim osa inyan shetia tefillasenu v'kubelas ritzuya b'makom zevach v'korban. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, accept my prayer, because I can't bring a korban. David HaMelech couldn't bring a korban because it wasn't appropriate in that situation. He acted b'mezid, he couldn't bring a korban. We can't bring korbanos, but we say Hashem Sefasai Tiftach V'Yagid Ilasecha. That pasuk, which was first recited by David HaMelech when he said, "I can't bring a korban." How powerful that is! How much of an important tenet of faith! Our entire relationship with prayer, as we discussed several weeks ago, and we're going to continue that conversation next week when we talk about the connection between sacrifice and prayer. Hashem Sefasai Tiftach V'Yagid Ilasecha means a lot more than God, please help me open my mouth, which it certainly means. But it means help me open my mouth because I can't bring a korban. I want to bring a korban, but I can't. And so therefore, accept my tefillah in its place in its stead. So here you have, my friends, history and faith on the surface, beneath the surface, below the surface. The Siddur, which of course is a book in which we express our tza'aka and our na'aka and our pilul and our kriya and our rina and our shira and all of the different ways that we express what it means to talk to and with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it is also a book which is full of many, many, many rich and deep and significant and profound moments in our history, which guide us and inform us and inspire us to this very day, and so many powerful and important fundamentals of faith. Remember how Rabbi Sachs said that the Siddur is the home of Jewish faith. This is a book, it's a philosophy book. It's a book which, if we only look at the surface, beneath the surface, and below the surface, and really try to explore, we could learn so much more of what we should believe as believing, as feeling, as thinking Jews. And so therefore, I hope tonight's shir inspired each and every one of us to do one thing, and that is to look more closely at the Siddur, to get to know it better, to look more closely at the words that we say, understand why we are saying them, understand them better on the surface, beneath the surface, and below the surface. And Be'ezras Hashem, if we do so, we will be zoche not only to daven better, not only to develop a strong relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu so that our tefillas halavai will be more meaningful and more effective, but we will also become more knowledgeable, more informed Jews, better students of Jewish history, students of Jewish faith, and all in all, developing a strong, more meaningful relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. Chanukah Sameach, and we'll see you hopefully next week.